Hello, this is Dr. Eric Bricker, and thank you for watching AHealthcareZ. Today we're going to be discussing the economic history of healthcare. And whoo, you are a true CrossFit athlete if you are able to stick with me through the economic history of healthcare. This is going to be a doozy. Okay, now, the basis for this is this book right here called The Lessons of History by Will and Ariel Durant. Now, Will and Ariel Durant were a married couple, and they were the most famous historians in America from the middle of the 20th century. They won like a National Medal of Honor for President Ford. I mean, these people, like, this is what everybody used to read in terms of history because they studied it for like 40 years, for their entire career. And they wrote this book that's only like 100 pages long that is all the lessons of history. And they talk about the economic lessons of history in one chapter, and they talk about, oh, by the way, this book is so good, Lessons of History, that it's Ray Dalio's favorite book. And oh, by the way, Ray Dalio runs Bridgewater, which is the world's largest hedge fund. And Ray Dalio is one of the wealthiest people in the world. So if this is Ray Dalio's favorite book, it's probably worth reading, and it's only 100 pages. Okay, now, what does it say about economic history? It says that economic history is the fluctuation between the concentration and the spreading out of wealth. So you have periods of high concentration of wealth, and then the wealth gets spread out. And then you have high concentrations of wealth, and then it's spread out. And that just repeats over and over and over again over time. And we've seen this play out. And he quotes like ancient Greece and ancient Rome, but of course it's happened here in America as well in the form of the Industrial Revolution, where it was referred to as the Gilded Age, right? Because you had the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers and all these huge families, the Carnegies, right? That concentrated massive amounts of wealth, while at the same time there were vast swaths of Americans that were being exploited. I mean, they had labor disputes where like people were getting shot routinely, okay? So it was a very violent time, right? So it was the age of tenements, right? Just these slums and squalor that people were living in New York City and Chicago and cities like that, where other people had just fabulous wealth. Okay, it was the also age of trusts, right? It was the age, trust is what they called massive corporations back then. It was a time of monopolies. It was a time of huge corporate power during the Industrial Revolution, late 1800s, early 1900s. And it was the time of Teddy Roosevelt, who came along and like broke up the trust. Now I'm talking about something very dangerous here, history, which can be interpreted many different ways, but I'm just giving you an interpretation of history. Okay, so right, what were some of the hallmarks of that period of time? They were Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, which talked about the hard living conditions, but specifically talked about the horrible way in which meat was prepared. And as a result of that book and public outcry, the federal government actually passed a Meat Inspection Act that dramatically increased the safety of meat after people read this book and realized how poorly meat was prepared in America. Next up, Standard Oil, right? Was broken up into what are all of the various oil companies today, and they were totally like scamming people, and they were making gobs and gobs of money, and their monopolistic power had to stop, and it was stopped by Teddy Roosevelt. Okay, so what does this have to do with healthcare? We have a healthcare revolution, just like we've had an industrial revolution, right? In terms of medicines and medical devices and healthcare as we know it today, it essentially didn't exist. And I'm going to put the date here at 1928, the year that penicillin was discovered. Now, everything, like everything that I do at the hospital, it didn't exist before then, okay? So we have undergone, like, the alleviation of pain and suffering and disability and the prolongation of life, like, before, like, 1928, people pretty much died. Like, that's pretty much what just happened. There wasn't much intervention. So we've had this huge revolution that's gone from the iron lung to the modern ICU, that's gone from penicillin to modern antibiotics to biologics, right? That's gone from cardiac defibrillators and implanted pacemakers, etc. Like, all this stuff has only happened within the last 100 years, right? And it's created, this healthcare revolution has created a healthcare concentration, right? And over that time, we've seen a concentration of trusts. You essentially can call these modern day healthcare trusts, right? So what does that mean? Studying history allows us to see the future. And so if we study history, by the way, my favorite quote on this is from Mark Twain. He said that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Okay, so is the history of the Industrial Revolution going to perfectly repeat in healthcare? No, but it's probably going to be similar. So for example, there are, and we can see it today, right? Healthcare journalists today have written dozens and dozens of essentially the equivalent of Upton Sinclair's jungle, the healthcare jungle. And what has that led to? It's led to regulatory change. It's led to things like the Affordable Care Act. But I will tell you that the current regulatory environment today is most likely not going to exist. The fact that you already see regulatory changes happening today, like the continued regulatory changes are going to happen, and they're probably going to accelerate. Okay, next up, you've seen massive consolidation of insurance carriers, PBMs, drug distribution, and hospitals themselves. So hospitals don't have national monopolies, but they are highly concentrated markets in each individual city. So there's tremendous market power by a hospital system within a city. And so to a certain extent, are we headed towards breakups? Does there need to be government mandated breakups of these modern day healthcare trusts? So we're basically here in the curve, right? We're nearing the top. And all these people at all these institutions are very smart. And they know that the party's going to change and the party's potentially going to stop. And so they're trying to consolidate as much as possible to maintain the status quo as much as they can, right? Typically, industry consolidation is a sign of weakness and threat, right? So we're not to the top yet. Is the top in a year? Is it in 5 years? Is it in 10 years? I don't know. But we're somewhere here on the curve, and because we essentially have modern day healthcare tenements, we have modern day healthcare trusts, and the question becomes, are we going to have a modern day healthcare movement such as that Teddy Roosevelt had in the early 1900s? So that is my incredibly fascinating lesson in history today. Thank you for watching AHealthcareZ.